up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, foreign ministers from South Korea and China meet in Seoul today to discuss ways to end North Korea's nuclear ambitions. In the largest merger of internet companies in Korea, web portal Daum and mobile messenger provider Kakao agreed to join forces to take on the country's web giant Naver. Plus, independent candidates start gaining popularity ahead of next week's local elections, reflecting the public's growing distrust of established political parties. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's New Monday, May 26th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime. China's top diplomat is in Seoul on this Monday for talks expected to center around getting North Korea to give up its nuclear program.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is also expected to fine-tune the details of President Xi Jinping's scheduled visit to South Korea next month. Our correspondent Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi arrived in Seoul Monday for talks with his South Korean counterpart Yun Byung-se. This is the Chinese diplomat's first visit to South Korea since taking office in March of last year. North Korea's ongoing threat of a fourth nuclear test is expected to top the agenda in talks, during which the two sides will reaffirm their joint commitment toward Pyongyang's denuclearization and discuss ways to bring the isolated regime back to the negotiating table. At the same time, the officials may fine-tune details of a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Seoul. Xi is expected to make his first trip to South Korea since becoming president as early as next month. Another pending issue on the table is Japan's denial of its historical wrongdoings and its push for collective self-defense. Both nations, major victims of Tokyo's past militarism, have voiced concerns over the Abe administration's pursuit to revise its pacifist constitution without fully recognizing its wartime atrocities. The Chinese foreign minister will wrap up his two-day stay in Seoul by paying a visit to President Park Geun-hye at the presidential office on Tuesday. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea and Japan will hold another round of government-level talks in Sweden for 3 days starting this Monday. Tokyo is expected to once again demand an investigation into the issue of Japanese abductees, while Pyongyang will likely call for ease sanctions in return. Kim Min-ji reports.
Senior officials from North Korea and Japan will sit down for government-level talks on this Monday in Stockholm, following up on the two countries' first talks in more than a year in March. The North Korean delegation will be led by Song Il-ho, its ambassador for handling relations with Japan, while Junichi Hara, chief of the Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau at Japan's Foreign Ministry, will lead the Japanese delegation. A range of issues are expected to be discussed during the three-day meeting, but the Japanese abductee issue will likely top the agenda. Tokyo is again expected to call for a reinvestigation into the whereabouts of Japanese nationals who were allegedly abducted by Pyongyang in the 1970s and 80s. This time, it reportedly plans to get a promise from the North in the form of a document.
The Abe administration has a strong determination to solve the abductee issue, no matter what, and will consider all methods.
North Korea will likely demand Japan to ease sanctions in return.
We plan to negotiate on issues regarding how to implement the North Korea-Japan-Pyongyang Declaration and also any issues that could follow after the implementation.
Attention is also on whether the North Korean delegation will include an official from its state security agency. The agency reportedly played a big role during the visit of then-Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi to Pyongyang in 2002. Likewise, Japan is also expected to slot in a cabinet official that handles North Korean affairs. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Former Japanese Prime Minister Tomoichi Murayama says acknowledging Japan's responsibility for war was not for Korea or China, but actually for Japan. In a special lecture in Tokyo on Sunday, the 91-year-old politician stressed the Murayama statement was not a personal, but rather an official, unanimous cabinet decision, which was highly valued by the international community, including its Asian neighbors. As for the current Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's push to allow Tokyo to exercise its right to collective self-defense through a reinterpretation of Japan's pacifist constitution, Murayama said if that happens, the constitution will lose its meaning. The right to collective self-defense essentially means Japan would be able to respond militarily if an ally came under attack. The Murayama statement, released in 1995, apologized for Japan's atrocities during World War II.
Things are about to get even more competitive in Korea's cutthroat tech industry. Korea's largest mobile messenger service, Kakao, and the second largest web portal company, Daum Communications, have announced their plans to merge. This will be the largest merger involving internet-based companies in Korea and could pose a threat to the nation's biggest search engine, Naver. Na Hyung-kyung reports.
It will be called Daum Kakao, and the new company will keep Korea's #1 web portal Naver on its toes, according to industry insiders. Daum Communications and Kakao on Monday announced merger with a share swap ratio of 2-3. That means every 2 shares of Daum will be equivalent to 3 shares of Kakao. Daum was founded in 1995 and was the biggest and most popular web portal at the time in Korea, but with the rise of Naver in the early 2000s, it started to lose ground in the market. Daum, which is currently listed on the tech-heavy Kosdaq, is valued at more than 1 trillion won or $1 billion, while the unlisted Kakao is estimated to be worth $2.3 billion. Kakao Talk is used by virtually every smartphone user in Korea. The words the heads of the two companies used were creating synergy effects when describing the merger. Daum's backlog of data will be beneficial to Kakao, while Kakao's mobile platform will help Daum expand into overseas markets. But industry watchers are interpreting this as uniting against Naver. Naver, which is listed on the benchmark Kospi, has a market capitalization of $25 billion. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Korea's finance minister is calling on the government and the private sector to work hand in hand to speed up the pace of the economic recovery. Hyun Oh-suk made the remarks Monday at a meeting with other policymakers, where he also asked businesses to advance investments. He said that while domestic consumption is picking up after the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, stronger momentum is critical now. Domestic consumption plunged last month in the wake of the ferry sinking. Minister Hyun went on to say that the government will continue to cut red tape to boost job creation and investment. Now, the amount of debt owed by the self-employed here in Korea increased substantially last year from the previous year. Hyundai Research Institute says the average amount someone who's self-employed had to pay back last year was around $12,000. That's up more than 20% compared to the year before. The institute attributed the increase to people seeking loans from multiple lenders, particularly from the non-banking sector, which tend to usually have much higher interest rates. The average self-employed person in Korea last year was $23,000 in debt at non-banking institutions. That's up 30% from 2012.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin Ju.
I'm Jin Ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, and Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Now, the focus has been on improving safety following the Seoul ferry disaster, but on this Monday, another deadly accident has added to the anguish and uncertainty here in Korea. A fire at a bus terminal in the city of Pyongyang, Gyeonggi-do Province this morning has killed at least 6 and injured more than 24 others. But the death toll is expected to rise further, with 7 to 8 of those wounded in critical condition. The blaze broke out shortly after 9 a.m. during rush hour in the basement of the station located just northwest of Seoul and was brought under control after about 20 minutes. Authorities have yet to determine the blaze, but firefighters believe welding operations at a construction site in the basement could have played a role. We'll be bringing you more details as we get them. Moving on, more and more voters are turning their backs on Korea's 2 biggest political parties and toward independent candidates leading up to next week's local elections. Arirang News' Ji Myung-gil reports on the say these voters will have on June 4th.
The closer we draw to election day, the more apparent it becomes that independent voters will decide the results, especially in the city of Busan, a conservative stronghold, and Gwangju, the traditional home ground of liberals. Of all voters on election day, a survey conducted by Embrain suggests that nearly 44% will be voters with no party affiliation. This holds extra meaning in Busan and Gwangju. In the ruling Saenuri Party's home turf of Busan, polls show independent candidate Oh Go-don up by nearly 4 percentage points over the ruling party's Hwang Byung-se in the race for the mayor. Oh's popularity saw a boost after candidacy merger on May 16th with Kim Young-chun of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in an effort to unite liberal votes. Over in the race for mayor of Gwangju, right in the middle of the main opposition's home ground, the liberal candidate Yun Byung-se finds himself trailing behind 2 independent candidates, Kang Eun-tae and Lee Yong-seop. And it could get worse for him, as polls show that if the 2 independent candidates were to merge, Kang's polling numbers would double those of Yun's. Lee and Kang withdrew from the main opposition party to run as independents in protest of party co-leader Ahn Cheol-soo's influence in the nomination of Yun. According to the National Election Commission on Monday, some 2.4 million more people will be able to vote in these local elections, up 6.3% from the last ones in 2010. The increase was attributed to the aging and growth of Korea's overall population. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, the news last week that President Park Geun-hye accepted the resignations of her presidential security advisor and the nation's intelligence chief caught most political observers off guard. However, given the ever-present threat North Korea poses, the president is expected to waste little time selecting their replacements. Choi Yu-sun reports.
The question on many people's minds is whether both posts will be filled by those from a military background. Both former security advisor Kim Jang-soo and former head of the National Intelligence Service Nam Jae-jun came from the military, both having served as the Army Chief of Staff. Despite the view of some pundits that the hardline stances of the military-dominant security chiefs have further strained inter-Korean ties, the speculation is that President Park will tap the military ranks again for her new security advisor. This amid North Korea's continued military and nuclear threat in the region. Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin is one of the names reportedly under consideration. As for the next NIS chief, someone from the diplomatic or judicial community who has experience with the spy agency could be nominated. Possible candidates include former spy agency deputy director and current ambassador to Japan Lee Byung-se and former prosecutor and current ambassador to China Hwang Sung-hee. Both Yi and Kwon were close aides to the president during the 2007 and 2012 presidential elections. However, the announcements could be delayed as both the ruling and opposition sides have raised concerns President Park's recent nominations for key posts centered too much around figures from the judicial community and Korea's southeastern region. With their approval ratings rising after a recent apology over the ferry disaster and the local elections just a little more than a week away, the pending appointments come at a crucial point. There's also speculation that a reshuffle within the presidential office could occur as early as this week. 최유선, Arirang News.
Turning now to the latest on the investigation into the Seoul Ho ferry disaster, authorities say there is a very strong chance the fugitive owner of the ferry is still right here in Korea. Yun Byung-se was spotted in the south of the country late last week, but has since dropped off the radar. Connie Lee reports.
One of the most wanted men in Korea has been spotted after being on the run for about a week. Prosecutors have confirmed that Yun Byung-se, the de facto owner of the sunken Seoul ferry, was in Suncheon, southern Korea, just days ago. Investigators say Yu is no longer in the city, but the sighting confirms that the 73-year-old was in fact in the country and may still be in Korea. Also on Sunday, authorities arrested 4 people for allegedly helping Yu flee. Prosecutors say all 4 of them are members of the religious cult led by the ferry owner, and that one of the arrests was made after the person was seen on surveillance cameras at the religious cult's headquarters. To help with the search, the cash rewards for information on Yu and his eldest son have gone up. Prosecutors are now offering up to $500,000 for anyone with information on the elder Yu and almost $100,000 for tips on the son. And in related news from Korea's southwestern island of Chindo, efforts to find the bodies of those still missing from the sunken Seoul ferry have been halted for now and could remain stalled until Monday. Bad weather conditions, including fast tidal currents and foggy conditions, have prevented divers from searching for the last 16 bodies still underwater. No bodies have been recovered since Wednesday, and the death toll stands at 288. But officials say that once the weather conditions improve, they will attempt to use remotely operated vehicles or ROVs to facilitate the search. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following at this hour. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the News Center.
Eunice, Pope Francis is on a 3-day trip to the Middle East, and during his visit to Palestine, he's been making a number of unprecedented moves.
Right, making an unannounced symbolic stop at a wall separating Israel and Palestine and inviting leaders from both sides of the divide to pray at the Vatican next month. Pope Francis is doing the annual papal trip his way. Here's Connie Kim with the story.
Pope Francis's first official visit to the Holy Land has been a succession of unprecedented moves calling for peace in Israel and Palestine. Breaking with the custom of only meeting with high-ranking officials in visiting countries, the pontiff instead chose to meet with refugees from Syria and Iraq in Bethany, where Jesus was baptized. There, he called on the international community to support the refugees.
I ask that the international society does not turn away from refugees and continue to send support for this issue.
In another first, the Pope flew straight from Jordan to Bethlehem by helicopter, bypassing Israel to show Palestine is an independent state. The Pope also made a surprise stop in front of the concrete wall that separates Bethlehem from Jerusalem. For Palestinians, the structure is a symbol of Israeli oppression. Laying his head against the wall, Pope Francis quietly said his prayers.
My interpretation of his praying is, let God bless Palestinians and Israelis in order to destroy this wall and to build on this place a reality of peace.
In another powerful visual statement, Pope Francis has decided to travel in a white, open-sided Pope mobile instead of a bulletproof automobile. The trip comes after Middle East peace talks broke down last week. The Argentinian pontiff said the breakdown was unacceptable, and in an apparently spontaneous move, he invited the presidents of both sides to the Vatican next month to pray for peace. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Billionaire chocolate king Petro Poroshenko has claimed victory in Ukraine's presidential elections and vowed to end the months-long conflict riddling his country and align it with Europe. Exit polls for Sunday's elections gave Poroshenko nearly 56% of the vote, enough for the 48-year-old a confectionery tycoon, to bypass a runoff against the runner-up, former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. Poroshenko is not new to politics. He served in the cabinet of ousted President Viktor Yanukovych and the administration before that. Meanwhile, Kiev's election commission said voter turnout came to about 60%. Less than 20% of the polling station in eastern Ukraine were open, where threats of violence by pro-Russian militants prevented citizens there from voting. And Thai military sources say former Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra is no longer in military custody after she and some 150 others were summoned to report to the ruling military junta on Friday. The source says she was allowed to walk out on Friday after being instructed to, quote, help maintain peace and order, but her aides say she does not have freedom of movement or communication. Meanwhile, the junta issued warnings through various broadcast channels on Sunday to avoid protests. Despite the ban on political gatherings, more than 1,000 demonstrators opposing the coup marched across the capital of Bangkok over the weekend, and more protests are expected on this Monday. It's being called an electoral earthquake. European voters appear to be handing a warning to their political establishment as exit polls show anti-EU parties making sweeping gains in the bloc's parliamentary elections. While the majority of the 751-member European Parliament will still be held by center-left and center-right parties, far-right groups look to be gaining a louder voice. French media report the country's extreme nationalists, the National Front, outran both the center-right party and President Francois Hollande's Socialist Party. Far-right wins are also anticipated in the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Austria. French Prime Minister Manuel Valls calls the election results more than a warning, as analysts say it's an expression of dissatisfaction with how the economic crisis has been handled.
Thank you very much, Eunice, for the international news there. Now, frequent air travellers have been told to beware. Now, airplanes may be one of the safest, most convenient and quickest ways to get around the world, but they're not really the cleanest. Right.
A U.S. research team says bacteria that could cause illnesses can stay alive on various parts of the plane for up to a week. Paul Yi reports.
From armrests to seats and tray tables, just about anything you come into contact with on airplanes will be swarming with disease-causing bacteria. And making matters worse, these dangerous germs can linger for days. A team of researchers at Auburn University took actual parts of an airplane and examined the ability of bacteria to survive on their surfaces in real cabin conditions. The experiment found that methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus survived for 6 days on armrests and 5 days on tray tables. The bacteria, which is resistant to almost all drugs and can be life-threatening, lived up to a week inside seat pockets. The E. coli bacteria, which can cause intestinal inflammation, thrived for 4 days on armrests and 3 days on tray tables.
We figured out that these pathogens can remain on these surfaces over a week, and there is a high risk of them being transmitted from these surfaces to the fingers of the passengers.
A U.S. airline company, however, said that passengers shouldn't be worried, as disinfection procedures are routinely carried out inside the cabins every day. But experts advise passengers should wash their hands frequently and bring along a packet of sanitary wipes just to be safe. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Well, the sunny and warm temperatures have returned to the nation to kick off the new week, and it will be slightly warmer than yesterday here in Seoul with an expected high of 25 degrees Celsius. And the weather outlook for the entire week in the capital is looking hot and sunny. No rain is in store, and by the end of the week, readings will soar to 30 degrees Celsius. And moving over to Jindo at the ferry accident site, the weather conditions have not been cooperating so well for the search divers. Heavy rain and gusty winds swept the area over the weekend. Well, although the rain has let up and the waves should be calmer, the winds will be strong today. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The high in Seoul will rise to 25, while Daegu tops out at 30, and Gwangju and Busan both should climb to 27 later on. For other regions, down on Jeju and Dokdo should see a high of 24. Daejeon will reach 27, while Mount Keungang tops out at 16. Well, that's all for me today, but I'll be back with more updates tomorrow morning.
Okay, those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.